hey, he can call me anything, I don't care. I'm gonna work with him till the day he dies. Because you know what? He gets it done, he knows what's right, he knows what's wrong, and no matter how unpleasant he can be in person, he's done, you can't even really talk without understanding the incredible work. I mean, most people never see it behind the scenes of the amount that this man works every day of his life for Coloradans and for his fellow citizens when it comes to issues of liberty and freedom. But he has, you know, over the years I have found one thing. He is starting to listen to me more and more. Anybody read Common Sense? Everybody, the newspaper, Common Sense? A lot of, for Workerowitz's paper. He writes a regular column in there now. He finally had one about a month ago that, you know, it took me for years. He poo-pooed a lot of this stuff with the fact, you know, he was one of the people that called me crazy in 2004 when I was trying to tell him, you know, he should buy more gold and silver. And he goes, oh, you're nuts. This is never going to happen. There's not. I told him the housing market's going to go. He goes, you're crazy. I said, okay. He goes, you know, he stopped short of calling me stupid completely, but he's finally rolled over. He had an article last month, and when he sent me, he copied me on it to read it before it was published. He says, well, I guess I've finally gone crazy like you have. But he was talking about all the same subjects and how we're going to get out of this. So once we have the state constitutions in place for this flow down of power, as we continue down, we get the delegated power of the states. So remember, I want to correct one thing right here, and a lot of people think this is a nit, but you know, language is one of the things that are most important in this battle. And when all the shortcuts and the short circuits that have been given to language is part of our problem. When I hear the term states' rights, I cringe. Just like if I hear the term property rights, gun rights, I just cringe. There is no such thing as states' rights. States don't have rights. And this is one of the problems we have, is the confusion of powers and rights. If you read the 9th and 10th Amendment, there was no confusion when they wrote. They understood the difference between only people have rights. Entities like states and corporations only have delegated powers, nothing else. When you start confusing and using shorthand in the term, I understand why people use the terms. It's a shorthand mechanism. States' rights, gun rights. But they're one of the mechanisms that it becomes hard to explain to a person, if you use the wrong language, what things actually are and how they pervert and invert and turn language inside out, so it's no longer understandable as to what you're really talking about. So, like I said, in some ways, yes, it's just a nit. In some ways, it's extremely important to understand, because when you get down to the discussion of how to actually understand how things work, terms become extremely important. And there's only power, and entities only have powers, that they are delegated from rights that we hold as people. People only are the only ones that hold rights. Nobody else, nothing else. People have rights. Everything else is fabrication and confusion. So when you talk about these things, please think about that in your, I do it myself, even from time to time, to avoid getting into the discussion when somebody, to move people along, I'll use the term states' rights or gun rights or property rights. But as soon as I can, I try and correct the language and say, if you really want to understand what's going on here, you have to understand that entities, artificial creations of people, such as corporations and states and counties and cities, they don't have any rights. They only have the powers that are delegated from the rights that the people hold. Nothing else. So we get to the delegated power that the people gave the states, to the Articles of Confederation, which is the first attempt to try and figure out how do we build this union in some form or fashion that we can function and be a union that can represent itself in the world and maintain its order internally. So they tried it in the Articles of Confederation. Well, after 6 or 7 years, they kind of came to the conclusion that wasn't working very well. Partially because they didn't, not because, see, this is another area where people, they get terms mixed up, right? And that the statement is always made that they had to move from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution because they didn't consolidate enough power into the central government. No, 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 no. They simply didn't organize it formally enough, correctly, to function. Not that they didn't consolidate enough power, they didn't put together the right organization. And that's what they attempted to fix with the federal Constitution. And this may be another area where we get into disagreement. I don't know. I don't know. When I go from state to state, one group that when I say this, they love me. The next place I go, they hate me. But this gets into the discussion that's currently underway in the debate about what we do with an Article 5 convention, or as some call it, a CONCON, Constitutional Convention, which it really isn't. But that's, like I said, that's a whole other discussion. And how we got between these two documents here, and the difference between the formation and organization of the Constitution and the flow down of power versus the Articles of Confederation. But I think everybody in this room would agree that the Articles of Confederation, they weren't organized well enough. But hey, this is the first time they've done this. Realize, like I said, we're sitting in Colorado now with about 1 million more or so people than there were at the time that they were doing this for 13 states, and they were trying to organize it, you know, into something that functioned at the speed of a horse or walking, and with no internet. I mean, it's amazing. They even got the Revolution prosecuted. When I talked to groups, I said, you know, we got this internet, we can't even organize in one state across counties, and we have the internet. Right? These guys put together in 2 years basically went from the Declaration to all-out revolutionary war through the committees of correspondence and across the states at the speed of a horse or walking in communication. And they did just fine. And we can't seem to get together really successfully with the internet, where we can do it at the speed of light and communicate in 3.5 seconds anywhere in the world. So, how they got to this point, but it was clear in the document that when we got to the Constitution, there was no national government, legal national government formed, nor was there one ever intended. Okay, it was an agent government, a subservient agent government of a union of states, meant to deal with issues in a strictly limited fashion of, depending on your interpretation, 17 to 21 powers that were delegated to them as powers in Article 1, Section 8, and a couple of subsequent sections, and what they could or could not do. Extremely, extremely limited. And look what they've expanded that into. But even so, they can't deny the fact that the only things that were fundamentally created as organizational units were the Congress, the President, the Executive, the Legislative, the Executive, and the Judicial branches. And under those come all the officers, executive staff, agents, employees, and contractors. But, as we can see from this simple presentation, where are we in the flow down of power? We're way the hell up here. Where are they? They're way the hell down here. It's not the other way around. No matter how, no matter how hard they tried through a century and a half to destroy that, they can't. And people have to, but when you present this to people who've never been exposed to it, like this group has, I had one woman about a month ago literally stood up and said, Jesus! She just had a complete catharsis. I am 62 years old, and this is the first time I have ever understood who I am in this country. She was absolutely, I thought she was going to melt all through the floor. I mean, she's just going, I cannot, and then, all I did was smile. I go, oh look, there's another one that'll never go back, right? She's been pulled out of the matrix. And that's what it's like for a lot of these people. It's like being pulled, how many people have seen the movie The Matrix? It's like being flushed, right? That's what she was feeling. She was feeling that feeling of being flushed and not having ever realized that she was sitting there in the toilet bowl. And now she was flushed, and she realized that it wasn't into the sewer, she was flushed into the fresh water. And it's amazing when you watch it happen to people, just how cathartic it is for them when they really get it, finally. And then they follow from there, and then they start getting the economic side, and then they're really excited. Most people go, economics, are you kidding me? There you go. They scratch their head. That's the most boring thing on earth. Not when you understand how it connects to you. And actually, it's not an abstract thing that's not connected to you. It is part of you. It is part of political economy. So, any questions? Anybody? I think we can. Anybody want to take a short break here, or 5 minutes, or stand and stretch your legs? How are we doing? Gee, must be keeping you entertained. Any questions? Anything you want to go back and? Okay. Let's go back here. So, once we understand who we are as people in this country, our country of Colorado, how do we proceed? The next thing we have to understand is what are the 4 requirements of a free state? Okay, and these are the ones I boiled it down to. I think you have to go from here. You have to have lawfully defined geographic boundaries. You have to have think of any country in the world. France, Belgium, think of any country in the world. If they're to be a free state, what do they need? I don't care. Like I said, Colorado is on an equal basis with France. That's the way the system was set up. They're on an equal basis with Russia. The only thing is that when it comes to defense, trade, and certain issues of international policy and policy making, foreign affairs, we have an agent government to serve us as a state for that function. Otherwise, there is a direct relationship. Commerce-wise, there's a direct relationship to any other nation on the planet with our nation of Colorado or Idaho or Montana. And how do we define ourselves in relation to those other nations? We first have to have those lawfully defined geographic boundaries, which, guess what? They came in the Enabling Act for Colorado, and they show up in the state constitution to define who we are geographically as a nation. Lawfully designated people and define residency and non-residency. Again, defined in the Enabling Act when we moved from being a territory to a state, and defined in the state constitution and statute subsequent to that. What's called positive law. The system of ensuring rights to property and the rights of commerce and trade. Naturally, if you don't control your own commerce and trade and economic affairs, you're not a free and independent state. An independent economy and banking system. And usually when I get the banking system, people go, what? Well, wait a minute, that's not allowed in the federal constitution. Sure it is. It's just that they have to make coin or silver money and nothing else. They can't produce their own money. But they are free to have their own independent banking system. They're not required to be part of any international or national, quote unquote, national banking system created by anybody else. Right? The state of North Dakota already has one. And it also is slightly different than most people's thinking. This is not another commercial bank. This is the state's bank. Just like the Fed has become, which was unauthorized, the federal government's bank, central bank, it's the state bank. It is allowed for a state, that's one of the retained powers that a state has. They can set up their own central bank for their own purpose. And it's not the purpose of commercial or retail banking in the state. That's an entirely separate function and charter of the free market. This is a bank that handles, if you want to, where do you pay your taxes to? Where does the state deposit all their money? The state shouldn't deposit their money into some private banking system and behold themselves to a private bank. They should deposit it into their own bank and their own treasury and control their own treasury. And they should do that, and they should accept and dispense payments with gold and silver as metal, right? As money. Metal as money, right? And then the private banking system actually develops the currency that can be used. Not controlled by any national or state authority. Currency is all competitive and private, not nationally bound. And I think, again, you know, we have these experiments underway that very quickly are going to show people the difference. And that's why governments all over the world are freaking out. Look at this little thing that came out of nowhere called Bitcoin. And that's just one, and there's more coming, believe me. And when I tried to alert people, again, when I started trying to alert people to Bitcoin in 2009, because I was waiting for them to start to emerge, in chapter 16 I call these emergent systems. Bitcoin is just one of the many emergent systems. And I said, watch this. I didn't endorse it, I didn't say invest in it, I didn't say, if you're going to invest, it's still a risky investment. But things like Bitcoin are simply emergent systems. They emerge in the free market all the time. They're how we got from the brick of the cell phone to the smartphone. They're emergent technologies, and they emerge in free markets and competitive economies. And the market for money is just as competitive and should be just as open and free as the market for anything else. How can you call every time somebody calls the U.S. a free market system, I just laugh. Not only from the level of regulation, I said, well, let's start at the base. How can you call the U.S. economy a free market economy when it's based on a monopoly fiat currency of a central bank that we have, that has no competition, and you have legal tender laws that force the rules of exchange using Federal Reserve notes? I said, there's nothing free market about the U.S. economy when the whole thing it's based on is a controlled monopolistic entity. Just start right there. You know, but again, it's one of those things, as when evils become sufferable, as Jefferson said, that it has become a sufferable evil because it's simply been around for 100 years. They couldn't stomp it out on day one, and its diseased, entangled system is just grown and grown and grown until now it's on the verge of destroying the very economy that the free people of the United States managed to build in spite of the fact that it was a controlled monopolistic currency, not because of it, but in spite of it. Because I guarantee you, the Federal Reserve, the 16th and the 17th Amendments had never come around. And we can only see this when eventually we free ourselves again, that we would have a $45 trillion economy today. Particularly if Nixon hadn't at least destroyed the last link to a gold standard and completely freed it to be a fiat currency. That's been the most single destructive thing to both the expansion of government, the advent of deficit spending, and the destruction of future economy because of what's called compounded negative growth, based on the fact that you're stealing money from the private economy in order to expand the government economy, which is not an economy. It's simply consumption of wealth. It is not an economy. It's only a consumer, and that's the other reason that you have to keep it so minimal. Because the larger you let it grow, the more it consumes of the productive economic side, and the less productive it becomes, the more it grows, until it reaches the point where it simply destroys the productive side. Again, it's that economics thing that people can't seem to get, and the cost of the unseen, as Bastiat put it, that people don't get. It's the cost of the unseen, the opportunity cost that's lost that in future growth. Take a dollar, study out, when I recite these figures to non-understanders, I don't call them non-believers, they're ignorant non-understanders, right? They go, wow, I never heard that. I said, a dollar borrowed or taken, taxed out of the private economy into the public sector never returns better than $1.70. And that's the best of the R&D return that you get out of government R&D. Most of the time, it's at unity, one to one. Take a dollar out, you might get a dollar back, to 60 cents, or you lose 40 cents for every dollar you put into the government economy from the private sector. compared to the private sector itself, if you keep that dollar and invest it in the private sector, it returns on average, at minimum, $3 for every